Hey everybody, welcome to the third video of the 5-part series on mastering communication and building relationships. This week I'm looking at the greens, and for those who don't know, throughout the series I've been looking at Surrounded by Idiots, written by Swedish behavioural expert Thomas Erikson, and the book essentially puts forward there are 4 personality types out there, each with a very unique set of characteristics and preferences, and the book gives you the ability to identify each of those personality types, which means you can tailor your approach and make you a much more appealing and convincing character. So in essence, the book lets you develop your communication skills, your interpersonal skills, your managerial skills, and also lets you build and navigate around relationships effortlessly. So if this sounds interesting to you, let's dive into the book itself and dive into the greens. So the greens, or the diplomats as I like to call them, is actually the most common personality colour, which is quite interesting because greens are kindness personified and they're super warm people. They're literally friends for life. So it kind of makes me think, why is the world such a messed up place? Well, I don't have the answer to that unfortunately, but what I can tell you is how to tell a green from the other personality colours. So first, let's look at their body language. Now, whilst the reds, the yellows, and to a smaller extent the blues might as well be holding up a giant flashing sign that indicates their personality colour, the greens simply don't do this, and that's because their body language tends to be quite subdued. So a good way to get around this apparent lack of indication of them being a green is if you think of a typical extreme red who leans forward aggressively when they're making comments, who gesticulates furiously and tends to do things really quickly in both their actions and their speech, then greens are pretty much the opposite. So they tend to lean backwards when talking as opposed to leaning forward aggressively. Their energy, for lack of a better word, makes you feel like they're genuinely listening and they have time for you, as opposed to a red's ridiculously impatient way of doing things. And they almost always have a friendly face, and they tend to be softly spoken and tend to do things a bit more slowly. Then the chances are that person is probably a green, or a diplomat as I like to call them. A green's body language suggests they don't want to be made a fuss out of, and that's in contrast to the yellows, who want to always be under the spotlight, or for reds, who want both hands on the wheel and want to call all the shots. No, greens simply want to be part of a team, and that kind of fits in with how greens perceive themselves. So if you ask a green to describe themselves, they might use words like warm, friendly, accommodating, people-orientated, and probably above all else, a team player. So this kind of matches their strengths, so let's get into that. So the strengths of the green are actually quite sadly unrecognised as much as, for example, the strengths of a red, a yellow, or a blue. And this is because greens tend to have the lowest profile of all the personality types. In an organisation, you want individuals who will simply get down and crack on with the work. And you want that without any fuss or any drama. Now a yellow, there's obviously going to be drama. They're the life of the party, so you can always count on the yellow to stir up some drama. The reds and the blues, they're very much task orientated, so they might question why you're doing this in a certain way. But reds wants to call the shots and the blues wants to make sure everything's done to a perfect standard. But then you have the greens. Greens, they simply sit down and crack on the work without any of that drama or any of that fuss. And they're also the gel that holds a team together because they're doing their deliverables in the knowledge that it's for the team. Not because they're doing it for their own ambition, like a red would, but instead they're simply focusing on a team. They don't want to let them down. On a more personal level, I've always wondered for myself, why is it I go to one of my friends for advice constantly? Now, I'm the kind of individual that listens to a problem and is hardwired to analyse it and come up with a rational solution. But my friend, he simply sits down, listens to me, doesn't really say much, but instead I just get the vibe that he's actually listening to me, he cares about what I'm saying, and that is something that I've come to realise is so much more important than just having someone like analyse your problem and come up with a solution for it. And that is very much what a green does. They're there for you, they're lifelong friends, they're kindness personified, and they're so reliable, they're always going to be there for you. So the main strength of a green, in my opinion, is the fact that they're exceptional listeners, they generally feel like they care about you, and they're such strong team players. As I've said before, all personality colours have their own unique strengths and weaknesses, and of course the greens are therefore no different. Their relaxed and easygoing nature, and their preference towards stability and security may all lead to a number of perceived weaknesses within their profile, so let's look at that. The first potential weakness of a green is down to their relaxed and easygoing nature. A green typically enjoys taking their time with their work. They're the kinds of people who hate to be rushed, and they generally don't thrive under pressure the same way a red would. So another crucial aspect of a green's personality profile is the fact they put human relations at the core of their thoughts when it comes to both actions and communication. So when it comes to a meeting and a green is facilitating or chairing that meeting, it might actually take a significant amount of time to actually get to the point of the meeting, as they might lose themselves in the pleasantries of small talk. Of course, what this may mean therefore is that a green could potentially be perceived as being a time waster, whereas a red or a blue might jump straight into the business at the onset of the meeting. The fact that greens may take the time to make sure that everyone's doing well and that everything's fine and dandy, and just having that pleasant small talk before the meeting actually comes into effect, this might mean that a green could be perceived as being a time waster. The second potential weakness that a green could be perceived as having is the fact they might come across as being weak. Now that's quite a strong statement, so again, please let me explain. As I've said before, greens are kindness personified, but this could be a weakness under certain situations. Greens are typically very much conflict averse, and they place security and stability at the core of their motivations and ambitions. So therefore, when it comes to negotiations, they might be all too ready to compromise early on and can cave into pressure very, very quickly. And this is because greens would rather retreat into their shell when it comes to confrontations. A good contrast against the reds' negotiation style will help explain why greens can be perceived as being weak. Reds negotiate in a style that's it's my way or the goddamn highway. So they'll really push forward and they won't take no for an answer. On the other hand, greens, who again are much more human focused and they're a lot more open to compromise because they want everyone to get along, when you contrast the red behaviour against the green behaviour, you can understand why some people might perceive greens as being weaker than their red counterparts. So as I've just said, stability and security is everything when it comes to a green. It is one of their main driving forces and one of their key motivations. So when it comes to the principles of uncertainty and ambiguity, this flies in the face of the values of a green. And these two principles are very much synonymous with change. For a green, change implies routine, their source of stability and security, being taken away from them. So generally speaking, greens are not the best at dealing with change, whereas a red or a yellow might be focused on the opportunities that change presents. The blues and the greens will very much be focused on the risks that the change presents. A green very much enjoys that routine, enjoys that structure that's given to them, and that's because it gives them stability and security. So this means that a green might be perceived as being too dependent on their current routine, and generally having a sense of complacency or lacking any further goals or ambition. When it comes to getting along with a green, this is actually a really easy exercise. You know, of course, assuming you're a human being and you have some level of decency to you. Because all you have to do is slowly build up a connection with this individual. Listen to them, share your experiences with them, and just try to understand their point of view. So when it comes to building up a relationship with a green and making that connection, you should know a couple of things. First of all, greens are more than happy to make pleasant small talk. So it's perfectly fine to talk about your friends, your family, ask them what they might have planned for the holidays, and so forth. But you should try to avoid controversial areas which might lead to forcing them to make opinionated statements. This leads to the potential for debate and confrontation, and of course that goes against their principles of peace, stability and security. That's a bit more conflicting, and that's one area that a red might enjoy in particular, but again that's not something a green would enjoy. Therefore, when it comes to greens, you need to build that relationship over a period of time. You need to take an organic approach and cultivate the relationship and let it grow. You can't really pretend they're your new best friend. Greens aren't going to be receptive towards that the same way as yellows might be. Instead, you need to build up an element of trust in that relationship, and therefore you need to take time to make sure that relationship gets to that point. In doing so, you will reap the benefits. So if you're working with a green, it's really important that you acknowledge their feelings. And you have to give them a sense of structure which will help them achieve the sense of stability and security that they always strive for. And when it comes to explaining processes and so forth to a green, a good thing is that they will definitely listen. So if you spend the time to actually explain everything before you actually slap it in front of a green, that's going to go a long way in helping solidify your relationship with them. And moreover, as I've just explained, greens aren't the best when dealing with change. But if you acknowledge this and you emphasize with their feelings and encourage their growth by taking the time to explain why the change is necessary and the benefits that can be reaped from adapting to the change, then this is going to go a great way in solidifying your relationship and helping it to grow organically. So green's temperament is like a barrel. They take complaints, criticism and arguments all inwardly. And it's sort of like the fact I've alluded to earlier about them being a turtle or a tortoise, because they're quite conflict adverse and would rather retreat into their shell. Well, they don't really retreat so much as store all that negativity over the years. So imagine that barrel finally filling, and then imagine pouring that barrel all over your desk. Laptop's going to be ruined, you're going to entail a great mess, and probably everyone's going to be a bit unhappy, except for maybe a turtle if you have one in your office. They like water, I don't know. But still, so that old proverb, beware the temper of a patient man, that proverb is bang on the money when it comes to the temperament of a green. I've seen a green explode once or twice, and I can tell you it really wasn't a pretty sight. And that's because their personality kind of does a U-turn. You have this image of them being like this sweet, caring, nurturing person, and all of a sudden they look like they're a jumped up psychopath from a really extreme movie. Just like all the other personality colours, there are actions you can take to help mitigate the stress factors of green. Having a knowledge of these pain points or stress factors will really go a long way in preventing that big barrel from upturning. When it comes to greens, there are a number of stress factors you should be aware of. First of all, greens don't like being thrust into the spotlight or being asked to put both hands on the wheel. In fact, they're a lot happy to let their reds and yellow counterparts take this over. And that's partly because greens tend to be a bit more introverted than the reds and the yellows, but also because greens don't perform well under stress. And public speaking may be a pain point or stress factor for a green. Second of all, rapid changes or unfinished projects are particular pain points for a green. And to be fair, I sympathise with this. Nobody likes seeing their project shelved. Nobody likes seeing all the hours of work that they've accumulated being put onto a shelf and to do later or possibly forgotten about. But because greens gain a strong sense of satisfaction of seeing how different components link together to form a cohesive whole, these are particular stress factors for a green. The fact that greens are very much human orientated is also a particular pain point. And that's because if the team itself has constant bickering, arguments or confrontations, and it's just generally not a cohesive vibe or a peaceful vibe in that case, then what can happen is that can have a real impact on a green stress level. And therefore the impact that a green can give to a team could be lost under these conditions. They're much more akin to a yellow when it comes to this kind of behaviour. Now, nobody likes to give bad news, but when it comes to greens, they generally have weaker egos and tend to be very self-critical. So giving feedback to a green can generally be very difficult to do so. But there's a number of steps you can take to make sure your message is at least well received. The greens are really good listeners, so they're definitely going to listen to what you have to say when it comes to giving bad news. And as I've said before, greens tend to have very weaker egos and they tend to be overly self-critical. So by explaining at the onset, before you even give the bad news, that it's not a personal attack and it's purely based on business, this is going to go a long way to make sure you don't damage your relationship with the green. Because the green's response is automatically going to be highly emotional, it's quite important that you follow up with the outcome of the meeting that you've had. So the bad news has happened, but what was the message you were trying to bring out and what's the action you wanted that person to do? It's really important you follow up with that action to make sure that message wasn't lost in their strong emotional response. I like to believe small things have a big impact. So at the end of the meeting, simply patting them on the back or showing some sort of small way that you're still like really good friends and it's purely business and not a personal attack, this will go a long way in making sure that you don't damage your relationship. Just like all the other deep dives I've done into the different personality colours, I'm pretty sure this has been quite a download. So what I've done, just like what I did for the yellows, is I've created a slide that basically sums up everything I've discussed in the entire video, and I'm going to remain true to my own word because I've never liked it when someone just reads off a slide, so I'm going to give you the time to pause it and to digest it for as long as you want. So, what do you guys think about the greens? Have you got any heartwarming stories about a green? Maybe something that's really made you feel touched, because that's what greens are really good at. If you have one of these, please share this in the comments below, because we all really need some wholesome content right now anyway. And on that note of commenting, please remember to like and subscribe to this video and make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, especially if you're a blue, because that's the personality colour I'll be looking at next week. And as always guys, thanks very much for watching. And I know I've done this nearly every single time, but as always I'm going to end the video with a quote. I'm going to tailor it to what I think a green would very much like. So this week's quote is by Gandhi, and he has said, "In a gentle way, you can shake the world."